over here on the East Coast. Atlantic Ocean is about 100 miles away. And I live in a Piedmont area, which is another hour drive from the mountains. So I looked at a photograph of your area and I saw that you're probably in a valley or there are mountains around you. And I hear everybody talking about the fire. We're getting some of the smoke coming this way. I don't know whether it's coming from Oregon or California, but I do have some sad thoughts for you guys that have to deal with that. As has been said, I was raised in a beekeeping family. I can remember probably the first time that I can really remember about the age of 5 of being the kid that walked around with a smoker, smoking hive entrances as we moved bees, sleeping under the truck as we traveled at night. We didn't stop at motels or anything. We just kept going. And early in the morning, we'd pull our sleeping bags out and climb under the truck and sleep. But times have changed, really changed. And Ohio, in looking at this comparison of climate, Ohio has all 4 seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall. Here in North Carolina, we have 3 seasons, basically spring, summer, and fall. We might see snow once in a while, but not very often. Our temperatures hardly ever get below 30 degrees, which in your case would be, I believe, 0, right? So the topic you'd asked for me to talk about is queen rearing. So I would like to get into that by first asking how many of you have raised queens?
I have.
Aye.
Yes.
Okay, so really, we're going to be talking to people who haven't done much queen rearing, and I would like to start scrolling through my PowerPoint presentation here. There's a biology that is true no matter who you are, where you live, or what you do. Anyone wanting to raise queens have to understand a certain biological fact, and that is we don't raise queens, the bees do. And they have a time schedule that we need to use if we're going to try to raise queens. Queens are produced from fertilized eggs, and I hope everybody understands that a queen can lay 2 kinds of eggs. An unfertilized egg becomes a drone. A fertilized egg becomes a worker bee, or if fed properly, can become a queen. Mating with a queen occurs in the air, and there are 3 conditions essentially that honeybees raise queens. And one is a swarming impulse in the spring. I got a note that said you guys have maybe some swarming in April, which would kind of match up with Ohio. Our swarming starts here in February. Our spring buildup really starts, we have brood by Christmas time, and that gives us a kind of an unfair advantage when it comes to raising queens. I want to point out that drones are extremely important in raising queens. We can raise queens in winter, but without drones to mate with, the queens, it's a kind of a worthless effort. But the drone does provide 1/2 of the genetic material that produces the young bees that a queen will lay. And of course, her genetics provides the other half. And by the way, if you have questions or comments to make, I sure would appreciate it. When I raise queens, I generally use the grafting method, but most people who are just starting to raise queens or want to raise queens, and I highly recommend anybody take a shot at it, because raising queens is really easy. The easiest way is really to start with a queenless hive. If you want to make a split or something, here in my area, we call that a dirty split. And the bees that are queenless will find a young larva. They'll feed it to become a queen, and the process takes a little over 21 days if you're trying to raise a queen in using the emergency queen method. What you're seeing on the screen right now is the grafting method that I've used in the past. What we do in the grafting method is basically transfer the young larva from a cell, a worker cell, into a cup that you see up here on the screen. I can take my cursor and show you one of these cups. We place the young larva in a cup, and the bees will feed royal jelly to that young larva. The younger the larva, the better the queen, supposedly. I think a queen's raised from a larva that's 5 or 6 days old is somewhat troubled with the fact that it doesn't have as long to develop as a 4-day-old larva. Food for the young larva is called royal jelly, and it's a white milky substance. And if you graft queen cells, that period of development actually has started before you move the larva into a cell cup. So it takes only 12 days if you use a 4-day-old larva to raise a queen. So let's take a look at this table. Drones, workers, queens, eggs for all of them is 3 days. The larval stage for a drone is 6.5 days, a worker is 6, queen is 5.5 approximately. These are approximate time schedules based on the temperature that the brood nest is. The pupa stage for a drone is 14.5 days, a worker 12, the queen just 7.5, and the total boils down to 24-day development time for a drone, 21 days for a worker, and 16 days for a queen. And I think we can see this in the pictures that are shown on the screen, the egg, the larval, pupa stage, and finally a queen emerging from a cell. You know, one of the most remarkable things to me is watching a queen born. As she comes from her cell, it's just a remarkable birth. And even though I'm 80 years old plus, it's still exciting to see a queen come out of that cell. A queen is capable of producing 60 to 80,000 bees, worker bees, a number of drones. She might live up to 5 years, but you know, that's in the literature. I don't find very many queens living to 5 years. In fact, I don't know of any that I've had that's lived 5 years. Now let's take a look at some of the advantages of raising queens. I've had in my notes here, knowing how will add a new dimension to your beekeeping skill. And I think most of us maybe are a little bit afraid to use the grafting method. And I've listed here 4 methods. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Doolittle method, but that's the one that's preferred by most queen breeders, basically because they have more control over the production of queens than you have in some of the other methods, especially non-grafting methods. No matter which method you use, you need a good population of young honeybees that will feed the young larva, a good amount of food. I prefer honey to sugar water. You need to keep a calendar so you don't lose track of time. You need to have a box separate from the mating nuke. Excuse me, a box which is called a mating nuke. We use a cell builder hive to raise queens. And a cell builder hive can raise a lot of queens, but every queen needs a mating nuke. And I'd like to spend just a little time talking about selecting the material that you're going to use to raise new queens from. If you have 2 hives of bees, you probably have a queen that you like better than the other. I very seldom find all colonies in a bee yard being equal. And if you choose the best queen you have, most likely you're going to be able to get better queens from that stock. So let's talk about getting queen cells built. Queen cells can be built in a 5-frame nuke. They can be built in a full size 10.
We've lost the volume, the voice.
Yeah, I think he's lost. Could be bandwidth issue.
Okay.
He may have to reload, eh, Mikhail?
Yeah, he dropped off here, so he'll,
Yeah, I couldn't see anything. It looked like the signal was gone. He froze and then he was gone.
yeah.
Oh, there he's back.
There we are, unmuted.
Yep.
Okay. You know, talking to this television screen or TV screen or whatever it is strange for me because I like to talk to people. And it is a little bit unusual to be looking at the screen. Now, what you're seeing, I'm seeing you, but I'm not
I think
seeing.
you're going to have to reshare again, Dana. There's nothing there, so you'll have to reshare because when you're relogged, it'll have to reload again.
Okay. I don't know whether that was my computer or your computer.
Hard to say. Probably just bandwidth between us.
Okay, I'm trying to load my PowerPoint back up here. We're going to zip through this again. Okay, I think this is where you last saw me.
No, we don't have it yet. Need to just hit screen share and then it should load.
I'm hitting screen share.
Mikhail, suggestions?
Yeah. Actually, Dana, I do have your presentation, so I could share my screen if that would work better right now.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just pull that one up. Let's see.
Now I'm looking at your screen and my screen. And,
There we go. Should be coming up now, I think. There we go.
okay, that's the same program, and
Yep.
we
Yeah,
are.
So
That's
just
where
let
you
me
left
know when
off.
you want to switch a slide, and I'll move it.
Okay, let's go down to the mating nuke slide. Okay, I'm going to more or less just talk a little bit here, and if you have any questions later, please jump in with questions. Every queen has to have a box of her own. If you put two young virgin queens into a box, you're only going to come out with one queen because they just really don't like each other, I'd put it. They'll fight, one of them will die. Next screen. Okay, there is a method called the hole punch method. I've used this. I really don't like it because what your goal basically is to punch one of the cells that has a young larva in it out of a frame of a comb without plastic foundation. You have to use wax, natural wax foundation to do this. Biggest problem I find with the hole punch method is your frame of young larva will look like Swiss cheese when you get done with it. But essentially, the hole punch method is a device, next picture, please, which has a little metal tube and a dowel rod that fits into the copper tube. And that copper tube is pushed into the wax comb from one side, and then the dowel is used to push that cell out of the tube onto a base of some kind. Usually I've seen people use little rounds, pieces of wood or something that can be put onto a cell bar. The principle basically is pretty simple. What you do is you remove the cell from the surrounding wax comb, and you don't damage the young larva in the cell. You can put then the punched cell onto a cell bar, and the bees will quite easily build a queen cell around the cell that you've put onto the cell bar. Next frame. This picture shows the metal tube being punched through the comb. It helps if this metal tube is warm because it goes through like cutting through butter. And you need to push the cell that you take out of that comb out from the backside. And if you have that metal tube with a wooden dowel to go into it, you can do it quite easily. Here you're seeing the base. The base is a round disc, and the cell is attached to it with a little bit of warm wax. And this is a non-grafting method. It's somewhat easy to do if you have the right material. Here in North Carolina, I don't see much of this going on. Up in Ohio, cell punching is used by a lot of beekeepers that only want just a few queens. I don't know of any commercial people using the hole punch method. Next slide. The advantages of the hole punch method, by the way, is it's pretty simple to use. It doesn't require the dexterity that one has if you're going to graft. And you can make the tools very easily yourself. As I mentioned before, biggest problem is the comb that you use to get the young larva look like Swiss cheese. Next frame. I don't know how many of you are familiar with C.C. Miller. His book, 50 Years Among the Bees, in my way of thinking, is the best book I've ever read about actually taking care of bees. the actual practice of beekeeping has not changed from the time Langstroth introduced his hive with the movable frame, unless you start thinking in terms of the 1980s and 90s and into the current century, with all the problems we have with varroa mites and in our area, small hive beetles and resistance to chemicals and that sort of thing. But when Miller lived, he died in 1920, but he had developed methods that helped beekeepers produce a lot of comb honey, but he had a lot of neat ideas, and one of them was a method for raising queens. He used a top bar, just a frame he would put into a hive of bees, put a sheet of foundation that fit into the top of that frame and cut it into a sawtooth fashion like you see here. Again, you need a strong hive of bees with a good mother queen. You can feed it with sugar water, sugar syrup. Again, I like to use honey, have a lot of honey available when I'm raising queens. You put this frame into a hive with a queen and let the bees draw the foundation out. The queen will start laying in that sawtooth fashion comb, and you will in 4 days take that frame out. I'm going to guess that it might take longer than 4 days because the bees have to draw the foundation. The queen has to get on that comb, lay eggs. But when they lay eggs, at least 4 days later, you can put this into a cell builder hive. It's pretty simple. You can take a look at this slide and see the start. The top picture shows the frame as it's put into a hive. The queen will come into the area that the bees have drawn comb out and lay her eggs. As soon as those eggs hatch and you have 4-day-old larvae, it's time to remove that frame. And if you look at the bottom frame, you again use a sawtooth cut to remove areas of the drawn comb. And you place it into a cell builder hive, and this is what you will get. In each of those areas around the saw cuts, the bees will build queen cells onto the cells that contain larvae of the right age. All of the new queen cells will be located at the edge of the cuts that are made in that. And the advantages, almost any hive will build queen cells from available larvae. It doesn't take too much effort to do it. There's nothing to buy. It's inexpensive. And it doesn't require a lot of labor or equipment, and no grafting. Disadvantages, on one frame, you might get maybe a dozen queen cells built that you could use for people who are doing grafting, for commercial grafting. Generally speaking, when they graft, we'll graft hundreds of larvae a day, and the Miller method just doesn't really fit into a system like that. The hive, by the way, that builds these queen cells has to be queenless. Let's take a look at the Doolittle method. And I would be curious when we get done with this talk to ask how many of you use the grafting method. Doolittle wrote in the 1880s and 90s about queen rearing. His book is the standard used by almost all commercial queen breeders. You know, he had that eureka moment in his life when he thought, well, what would happen if I would take a larva from a cell and place it into one of these cups that you find in a beehive, you know, the empty queen cell cups that are in a lot of beehives. He would try to transfer, and it worked. So he came up with the idea of making his own queen cell cups using liquid hot wax and using a dowel that would replicate a natural queen cell cup, and took a needle or tool of some kind. I'm told it was like a feather. And he moved that young larva into the cell cup, and behold, the bees produced queen cells. Okay, let's go to the next one. Next slide, please. The grafting process really starts with a tool. Being around the commercial beekeeping business, there are several unique things that commercial beekeepers do to produce queens. Number one, we take a hot knife over a frame of 4-day-old larvae. And how do we know they're 4 days old? We have every frame marked. When we place it into a queen mother's hive, queen mother is kept in a spatial section of the mother hive, usually queen excluders on both sides of the frame, and she is confined. She lays her eggs, and 4 days later, that frame is removed, and if the eggs have hatched, it's sent to the grafting room. At the grafting room, someone will take a hot knife and cut the deep cells so that they are very shallow. They don't bother the young larvae at the bottom of the cell. And as most of you know, those young larvae are almost hard to see. I mean, they are very small. And in a commercial business, I have always seen most of the grafting people are women. They have better dexterity than men. But what they do is they lift that very young, small C-shaped larva out of that cell and place it into a cell cup on a cell bar. Young larvae, if the hive is well fed, will be resting in a small bed of royal jelly, some milkish-like substance. This is a slide that shows you transferring the young larva into a cell cup. That's called grafting. Once the grafts are completed, they are put cell bars, usually holding 15 cells, and a frame holding 45 cells is put into a cell builder hive. Cell builder hives are it's very important to have young bees in cell builder hives. In the commercial business, oftentimes we go out and shake frames from hives that have young brood to keep refreshing or replenishing the bees in a cell builder hive. And within, if you look at that slide just above, just one frame up. If you look at these cells, these are examples of what this right here. My cursor is on cell bar with grafted larva. You need to go down one. There we go, right there. You'll notice that the bees start building some of that queen cell around the edges of that plastic cell cup. You know that the young larva has been accepted by the bees and it's being fed by the bees. Once they start building that wax around the cell, bees will make multiple trips feeding that young larva so that it will become a queen. Next slide, please. One of the things that this method does is you have a consistency of almost all the queens that are produced on a cell bar being the same age. And because they are all the same age, a person in the beekeeping business knows that in 16 days from the day the graft is made, they know that the queens are going to begin emerging. So 12 days is, if you don't do anything before 12 days is up, you're going to have all those queen cells cut down because the young queens are going to start emerging. And as soon as they start emerging, they're going to be cutting down queen cells that are pretty good. And if you want to waste all your effort, that's what's going to happen. Usually 2 days before these queen cells are to emerge, they're moved into mating nucs. Okay. I want you to take a look at the picture in the background. That is a commercial beekeeper in Georgia raising nearly 1,000 queens a day. And nobody really, if you have 1,000 queens coming off every day, there's no way you can do much with them other than have customers to buy them. Queens that are mated in small nucs will abscond, leave the hive. Again, it's one of those things where people start thinking about banking queens. And banking queens I don't like at all, because queens that are taken from a hive, they're laying and then placed into a queen cell, into a cage and put into a bank. I've never really thought that that dormant period helps them out very much. Okay, let's go to the next one, please. This Jenter method is called something else today. It's really a little cage that a queen is placed in. On the back side, it has queen cell cups, and the queen then from the front side lays into those cells. It's called a non-grafting method. Supposedly, if you look at bee supply catalogs, they'll tell you can get 110 queens produced in one of these little things. The biggest problem behind the Jenter method is you place the queen in there and she takes a little bit of time to lay. And then when you take the queen cell cups from the back, even though they seem to be eggs, you don't know whether they were laid yesterday or 2 days ago or 3 days ago. So there's going to be a disparity in the age of the queens that are produced in the cell cups that are in this cage. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea of what the cell cups look like. This is just one part of the system, because the system consists of this little cage, the plastic cups, and then there's holders to put the plastic cups in. And then later there's like a little cage that's put over each queen cell, because if a cell emerges before any of the others, they want to keep it from cutting down the cells. And let's go to the next case, or the next picture. This basically tells you the difference in ages. What happens if a young virgin queen in a cell builder hive emerges from the cell before any of the other queen cells? She will begin the process of cutting them down. That happens in any cell builder hive. Okay, next slide. Mating yards. This is a mating yard that I had in Georgia, and I want to point something out. The mating nucs are over here under the trees. The colonies in this area are drone colonies. And you need a lot of drone colonies if you're going to mate a lot of queens. Every virgin queen requires maybe up to 20 drones to get a good mating. And one of the problems we're having, I see this day in and day out here in North Carolina, where queens that are sold in packages fail. And they fail because they are not well mated. If there is a shortage, let's say cold weather or something comes along, and I'm sure you see that up there, the drones are not produced as plentiful as they should be, or they're kicked out of the hive. But cold weather is bad news if you're trying to raise queens, because you can raise the queen, the bees can keep the cell warm, the queen can emerge from her cell, but she's got to be able to mate with a number of drones. Next slide.
It appears that that's the last slide I do have,
Oh, okay,
the mating yard.
okay. Thank you. It's, I apologize for the problems that I'm having here. What I want to do is go back. Now, this slide you have, and you can use it over and over again, covers the basics of raising queens. But I work with a lot of new beekeepers, and I write a newsletter, which you may have, Michael, and you can share that with anybody you want. Anybody in your group can ask to be put on my mailing list, and I will be glad to include sending emails of that newsletter out. But I'm working with a lot of new beekeepers, and all of them get really interested in just talking about queens. I don't know what the price of queens are in your area, but down here, and I'm going to talk about dollars, the price that people are paying is around $40 a queen. And if you look in the queen supply catalogs, you'll notice that Man Lake is one supplier down here. They have 10 pages of queen rearing supplies that they sell. One little plastic or styrofoam nuke sells for $24, and it has 3 little frames about the size of a comb honey frame, and it has a little feeder inside of it. What we do is I buy these little styrofoam coolers at what we call the general dollar store. They are a little bit bigger, build my own frames, and put foundation into them, just wire 2 wires. And unfortunately, I don't have pictures of that on this slide presentation, but basically, it doesn't take as many bee resources to keep a little mating nuke going. And so what we do is we have our students take one of these little plastic beehives. We build frames for it. We put foundation in it. We put the foundation into a hive that will build the foundation, draw it out. And then after the foundation is drawn out, and we put it into a hive that has a laying queen. So the laying queen will lay eggs in the foundation. Oh, good, you've got it up there. But this is a styrofoam cooler that sells here at the Dollar General stores for $1. And we cut frames that fit into this little cooler. And the trick is basically to get the comb drawn out. If you were to try to use this little cooler with just foundation, the bees will leave it. You've got to have brood in your comb in order for the bees to stick around. But what we do is let the bees use the emergency queen method, which basically is if the queen is gone, the pheromones are not present, the bees will find a larva to feed, to produce a queen, maybe several of them, And it's just the natural way that bees survive if they lose their queens. If we can move on down, this gives you an idea of the size of the frame that's in those little nukes. Notice that it's cross-wired. There's a wire going through the foundation. The end bars, by the way, are purchased, and we make our top and bottom bars ourselves. But this little nuke is really going to be able to produce several queens as long as you take queens out shortly after they start laying or transfer them into a nuke or a hive. Notice how these frames, these two outside frames here are follower boards. That means there's no way for the bees to build comb on these frames. It just keeps the sides against this cooler straight, so the bees don't build burr comb in there. Okay, let's go on down. This is what one of these little nukes looks like after you have bees in it and it's raised to queen. They're very light.
Please.
And this is what it looks like with bees. And any one of these frames has comb on it. And once it has comb, bees, and a queen laying in there, you can harvest the queen. And then the bees will raise another queen from the egg that she has laid, or eggs. Notice these are very light little mating nukes, and we've had to tie them around, use a rope to tie them to cement blocks to keep them from blowing away. We had Tropical Storm Elsa go through here with 50-mile-an-hour winds not too long ago, and had these little hives not been tied down, I don't know where we'd have found them. Now, how do we get the comb? I'm sorry.
One question for you. So you say, so if you do pull the queen, is there sufficient of worker bees there, the nurse bees, to really do another quality queen in such a small hive?
You can do that basically by adding a cup full of younger bees.
Okay.
This is not a sustainable hive. When I say a sustainable hive, you could take a 5-frame nuke, let them raise a queen, doing the same thing, but use a 5-frame nuke. And because she lays a good pattern of eggs and they have a lot of bees, maybe brood that is already in the pupal stage that will add to the bee population in that nuke, that is a sustainable nuke. This is not a sustainable nuke. So you have to keep refreshing the bees, but you can let them raise emergency queen cells. So you've got 1 or 2 queens. It's purely for a hobby beekeeper. It's not really going to be something that commercial beekeepers would do, but it's fun. I've had a lot of fun playing around with these because it doesn't cost a new beekeeper any money, hardly at all. They get to see the principle involved, the process of bees raising emergency queens, and they get a chance to watch a queen either emerge from a cell sometimes, and sometimes we have been lucky enough to be in the bee yard when a queen did emerge from a cell, and talk about adults being like children, running around and kind of oohing and aahing. It's just a lot of fun to be around. Now, I want to share this last picture with you. This is a hive that has the same dimensions as these little mating nukes. This one happens to be 7 boxes high. Each one of those boxes holds 4 frames. And essentially what I do is I start frames with foundation, and what I do is get this thing started with a package of bees with a good queen. I do have the ability to, by the way, shake bees into packages and then move them from my bee yards, my out yard, back into where I raise my queens. And this hive is full of bees. I mean, every box is crammed full, and I do feed them. And I will take the top box off and use the top box once the bees have drawn the comb and the queen has, well, usually the top box doesn't have the queen with eggs, but in this area here, maybe this hive or this box, you know, the queen will be in here laying with brood. And what we'll do is take these frames and put them into those little styrofoam nucs. And it's interesting to note, I can tell you one thing that we have discovered is you can take a nuc box like this with just foundation, put a queen and bees into one of those little plastic styrofoam mating nucs, and the bees will leave. Queen flies off with the bees. It's just not big enough to sustain a hive. But if you have brood in that little box and provide them with a queen cell or let them raise a queen, they will stay. But if the queen starts laying eggs and fills that little box and there are no more cells available for her, she'll abscond. So it's really tricky. It takes a lot of checking that hive to make sure that you take her out of there and start another queen because you're just causing a swarm. I mean, quite frankly, bees need bigger chambers to live in. A little small box is not going to do it. But if you stack it up like a tree, like I have here, 7 boxes, that is sustainable.
Dana,
Hello?
yes, could you not attach several of those little frames to a top bar and put them in a standard hive and let the bees draw the wax that way?
Well,
Because that way
let
you
me,
don't have to worry about it. Go ahead.
yeah, I'll suggest one suggestion to you. I have an inner cover that fits a 5-frame nuc that has an opening in the top of the inner cover that this little nuc will set right on top of. And you can introduce
Okay.
a queen or the nuc right into that 5-frame box.
Okay.
And that's the
So
easiest
how
way
do
I can.
I'm just thinking about how to draw wax on those little frames. If you attach them to an ordinary top bar frame, not the frame itself, just the top bar, several of them in a row, and put them in a hive and let the bees draw them out.
Right. You could do this also. There's several things you can do. I like to support the foundation that's in the frames, because if you try to use the top bar method, in other words, the comb is belt down, the bees will belt the comb if you put a starter strip in each frame.
Right.
But if you are trying to find a queen and you're trying to flip the frame from side to side to see what you're looking at, that comb often will drop off the frame. And so I put wire in there. I put wire in to support the comb. And it seems these are almost identical to what a full-size full-size deep frame would be, except they're little. I mean, they look, if you take a look at a regular frame that fits a Langstroth hive, this is probably 2/3 of what a shallow frame would be in terms of area of brood that the queen could lay in.
Okay.
But for new beekeepers who are just starting to raise queens, if you want to teach the principles, there's a good example of a small frame that it's a wired frame. I don't know, did you try to extract this?
No, it was actually the heat that we had. This is one of the mini hives that I had with a new queen in it, and it just got too hot for them. Just melted.
Okay, you did mention to me in our communications about being so hot, but yeah, it's sad. Yeah. And it's, drawn foundation is a real asset to have. You can have a lot of foundation frames, but here in North Carolina, you can't get them drawn unless you're feeding them at this time of the year. In the spring of the year, they'll draw all kinds of comb. Now, they won't draw anything unless you have food on them.
Good to know. Thank you.
Well, I really wish I could have done a better job here. I feel somewhat at a loss talking to my screen.
I
It's
think you
kind of a
did.
lonely sort of thing.
I think you did an excellent job.
Well, if any of you do want to get the newsletter, my email address is stallmanapries@aol.com. The club could probably list that for you in a newsletter or something if they have it. And I will put you on the mailing list. I put out a issue each week, not once a month. This thing goes out every week. And right now I'm dealing with small hive beetles. Do you have small hive beetles up there?
No,
Uh,
we do, but not many.
I've got a jar right here in front of me. That's some that I collected out of a little nuke today.
Keep them
And,
down there. We don't need them up here.
Yeah, well, you can see they're pretty active little birders, and they I don't know whether that's, but I've got a way to catch them. I have a little vacuum cleaner I take with me to the bee yard and just scoop them up. And when I want to take pictures or something, I kind of
Good for you.
you
I'm
know,
glad you do that.
yeah. But they are a problem, and we have various kinds of traps and things we use to try to get rid of them. But they can do a lot of damage, and the next newsletter coming out will be all about small hive beetle. And I don't wish them on anybody.
Thank you for your presentation.
Well, you're more than welcome, and thank you for inviting me to give it. I have been up in not particularly Vancouver. I've been in Vancouver. I've been wanting to go up into northern, into the mountainous areas of British Columbia. I've been up into Fairbanks, and I've been over into Dawson City. I like the backcountry a lot, and getting to my age, I can't do any hiking or anything anymore, but I do kind of like the territory you're in.
We live in the desert here.
You live in what?
We live in the desert.
I saw that
Sagebrush-
semi-arid comment.
Sagebrush and cactus
Uh-huh.
and rattlesnakes.
Well, we got copperheads.
Oh, no, well, that's worse, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're ever up this way, make sure you stop around Kamloops area. Lots
Well,
of friendly,
I will try to do that.
lots of
um,
friendly beekeepers here.
Yeah. I just spent this past week in New York State where I hate to tell you this, but they've had flooding conditions, too much rain. And here in Raleigh, we get hurricane-like conditions from time to time. We're getting into the tornado season now. That's why we have to tie our beehives down or strap them down, because if we don't, we'll be finding top covers a couple miles away.
I know. Yeah, I know. Okay,
John,
thank you.
Well, thank you so very much.
If I can ask one question there. do you reuse the queen cups at all? We graft into, or are they just a one-time thing?
Are you asking me?
Yes, please.
Okay, the queen cell cups, the plastic ones are a one-time thing. I only place I know in the United States to get waxed cells would be Rossman's Beekeeping in Georgia. They do have a machine that makes nice wax cells, and I don't see any difference between grafting into the wax cell cups versus the plastic. The plastic I get are the Easy Beasy cages and plastic cells. And one of the things about the plastic cell cups is you can get them color coded, which helps you a little bit with your, if you're putting, let's say, 3 cell bars into a frame and there's any difference between the mother queen, for example, you've got a queen that you want to graft from and identify her and kind of track her prodigy, you can use a different colored cell cup. And there's just, I've artificially inseminated queens. I don't do it anymore because I can't see so well and I kill a lot of virgin queens trying to use the equipment. So I've kind of given that up. But if you want to find a outstanding queen breeder here in the United States, I am a very close friend to Joe Lackshaw, Lackshaw Apiaries in Ohio. You have the Saccatraz bees. I don't know whether they're, you're using those in your area, but they seem to be doing well in Ohio. People in Ohio really like them. And here in North Carolina, it seems like we have a predominance of Italian bees because they're very broody and productive. And because of our climate, they do extremely well, especially if you want to produce package bees. And Carniolan in Ohio are also, very popular. I notice your background you show is nice Italian bees. I like the color of those bees.
Thank you. Just one more question that I have personally myself. So when you fill a small mini nuke, for example, with a queen cell that's already capped, would you normally go with a 1 cup of bees for that? Or how much would you go? 1 cup is about 600, right?
Because it's warm down here, I can get by with 1 cup. I usually, you saw the hive I had for drawing comb. I usually take the bees on a frame and I actually take the mating nukes away from this yard where I build up my queens. My cell builder and stuff are here at my home property in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I move my bees about 20 miles away where I have a mating yard that has, every colony is a Carniolan drone mating colony. And I'm using Joe Lackshaw stock for mating with my queens. The queen mothers I select essentially from local breeders that are successful with what they call survivor queens that kind of fit into our environment here. And so I'm getting what's called a hybrid, and hopefully it adapts well to our conditions. We have drought-like conditions here too. So when we get into July, our bees are robbing like crazy.
Any other questions from anyone? I'm not seeing any hands up. Mikhail, you see anyone?
Well, just let me say thank you so much for communicating with me. Michael, especially with keeping track of how things are going. And I see the names of people on the top of my screen, and I really appreciate those that have made a contribution, given, talked, and shared some ideas. I just love to hear what's going on in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. I have been to many countries in Europe, and quite frankly, wherever you go, you'll find a little bit different take on beekeeping and learn something wherever you go.
Okay. Well, we appreciate your time and thank you very much. Ian, thank you for organizing tonight's speaker and our educational portion of our meeting tonight. And we'll let you sign off, Dana, and thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it. And we'll,
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
all right.
Thank
All
you.
right. Take care.
Okay, good night.
Good night. Okay. Great presentation, Ian. Thanks very much for coordinating that for us. Appreciate that. So moving along.